Good evening and welcome back. We've got one satellite picture this evening, which is the orbiting satellite. On it we see that the area of scattered clouds associated with the high-pressure system in the mid-Atlantic has dissipated somewhat. That was a look at the weather. When we come back, Morris will bring us up to date in sports.
A very warm welcome to my community. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. As always, I'm pleased that you have joined us. Well, that was February 8th, 1986. Many of us might remember her as Barbados' first female weather presenter. She was a radio broadcaster at the time on 900 AM. In the evenings, she took on the role of weather presenter. Kaie Cozier will be featured in the new series titled Beyond Our Shores, where we will explore the work, the contribution, the outreach and influence of Barbadians who dedicated their lives to service abroad. However, this week we are delighted to have Kaie Cozier as our guest on My Community. Now, this episode is unique as Kaie was born elsewhere and came to Barbados at an early age. Her story begins in the United Kingdom and unfolded in the northern Barbadian communities of Benthams and Shermans. Before we discuss her childhood, her community life here in Barbados, Kaie will share her earliest childhood memories.
I was born in London. Grew up in North London, have always been a North London girl. And my earliest memories actually is of my mother buying me a pair of red Dr. Scholl's sandals and leaving them on the bed. So I came home from nursery. And it's funny how things stay in your mind because the sun was coming through the window and it was like the sun was pointing at these shoes. My mother hadn't told me she'd bought them, but she knew I wanted them. And I remember being so excited about them. So that's one of my first memories. I have another one of my mother buying me a red tricycle and me watching dirt bike racing with my grandfather and thinking, oh, this would be fun to do. So no word of lie, Sherwood, I rode the bike down the stairs. Ended up in hospital with a concussion. But it was fun while it lasted. So I think that fairly much describes who Kaie Cozier is. I like to take chances, even if they go sideways. Yeah, so I came here. My grandfather lived in England, and he came back here. I was very close to my grandfather. I called him Daddy. That's the kind of relationship we had. And when he said he was coming back to Barbados, I said I wanted to come. And my mother said, oh, no, you can't come. And I think that's probably the first time in my life, first and only time, she's allowed me to throw a tantrum and not given me licks for it. So the tantrum meant that we came home in, I think it was October 1970. We came on a boat.
We have heard the stories of the Sariento ship and the experiences of that long journey from Barbados to the United Kingdom. The departure and the arrival of the ship were always significant events for Barbadians. Kaie departed the United Kingdom by ship and sailed to the Caribbean. What were her experiences during that voyage?
I broke my arm. I wasn't doing anything crazy. I was sleeping in a top bunk and I rolled out of the bunk and hit the ground and broke my left shoulder. So yeah. Yeah, I remember it.
Do you remember arriving at the port?
I remember arriving at the port. Actually, if I'm not mistaken, and my uncle, I'll have to check with one of my uncles, but I think we went into Trinidad and then got a plane up. So, yeah, because I remember my uncle years later talking about how my grandfather slammed his car door. So, yeah, and I remember the humidity coming from England where back then we had summers, but, you know, I came in October, it was still fairly cold. And then to have this humidity and heat, almost like a blanket on you, and everything was green. And there was, I remember sugar cane for as far as I could see, and just being a bit like Pilgrim in the City, but I was the reverse, and just, wow, wow. Bentham, St. Lucie, yes, yes. That's where I spent the next 3 years. A little village, everybody knew everybody else, everybody seemed to like everybody else. It was a real community. It was my first taste of genuine community. I think in England I had this perception that Caribbean people dealt with Caribbean people because they had to, you know, in the face of the racism and the total difference of environment. But in Bentham's, I learned very easily how big the community was, even though it was a small village, because if you did anything, by the time you got home, your grandmother knew about it. So there was no privacy, but there was community. You know, I remember my grandmother would say, take this bag to Miss So-and-so and ask her if she's got whatever. And the first time she told me that, I made the mistake of looking in the bag. Never made that mistake again, because it was my business. But yeah, it was community. I think that's the one word I remember, community.
Interestingly enough, Bentham's is a small community in southwestern St. Lucie. An area becomes a community when it is populated by people who live, who interact, and essentially have their being there. So what was the Bentham's community like during Kaie's days?
Yes, there was Vibert Carter. He was a mechanic. He had a wife, Norma, and I think Debbie, his daughter Debbie, daughter Cheryl, son Ali, who sadly passed away. And they had the first television set in Bentham's. So we used to go and stand up by the window and watch Barnabas Collins and Dark Shadows. Dark Shadows, yes. We only had to walk across the road, but you know, I grew up in a house with mainly my cousins, boys, and boys are cruel. They would run and leave me and I would have to cross. And I mean, it wasn't a big distance, but it seemed like from St. Lucie to St. Philip when you're 6 or 7 years old. Yeah. There was Gordon, he had a shop opposite the bus stop. So if you needed any quick stuff, they were there. And it was always fun to stand outside the shop and listen to Gordon, because Gordon used to get drunk. I'm not going to repeat. But Gordon's favorite word was right. So, and the general store / gas station at the bottom of Bentham's, which was run by, I believe, Nancy Roach. But I didn't have calls to go to a shop. I wasn't working anywhere, so I had no money to spend. I didn't have money to spend, you know, and if my grandmother was sending me over to Gordon's, it was with explicit instructions and, you know, bring back home the change and don't go anywhere else. There was the post office where my grandfather would go and hang out. There was a guy, I can't remember his name, he was the night watchman, but he would always be asking my grandfather about his travels, and if there was anything he didn't know, he would say, well, of course, you know, I got to ask you, he's a man who's traveled, so, you know, I got to ask you these things. Can't remember his name. My mother, I call her the Oracle, because she remembers everybody's names. But, yeah, there was the post office. I think that was, that's like the sum total of the first time I went to church, proper church, was at the front of the road, our gap. There was like a little church hall, the Wesleyan Holiness, yes. So I went to church there, and church was not something you could say you didn't feel like going. If you were dead, you were expected to be like Lazarus, pick up your bed and walk and go to church. So, and then we went, you know, then we went to big church, like up at St. Lucie's parish church. But yeah, that was my hood. That was my hood.
Well, We saw a little girl from London arriving to live in a rural northern community in Barbados. It was common for parents to send their children from the United Kingdom and from North America to live with their grandparents in the West Indies, often believing their children would benefit from the West Indian education system. Now, you might recall that the late Shirley Chisholm, the United States Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm, was one such individual who later credited the Barbadian education for her influential career and her contribution to New York and America on a whole. Similarly, upon her arrival here in Barbados, young Kaie immediately enrolled in a nearby primary school.
Yes, I went to St. Lucie Primary School. I don't actually remember much about school. I remember going to school. I remember most evenings we would, I think there was an episode of Dark Shadows where one of the, I'm going to be haunted by Dark Shadows and The Bold and the Beautiful for the rest of my life. But there was a woman on Dark Shadows who had really long fingernails. And somebody said if you rub the juice of the clammer cherry on your nails. So every afternoon we'd be there rubbing, not thinking that when you get home, the first thing you have to do is go by the pipe and wash your hands. And it took us years to work out why we weren't getting long fingernails. But yeah. There are a couple of people I remember. Patrine Gibson, who I saw recently in the supermarket. A girl called Moy Edwards. And that's the sum total of where my memory will take me in that direction. But school was fun. I've always enjoyed school. I've been one of those weird kids that loved school because I love reading and I love learning.
Now, what was it like for a British girl in Barbados who was teased by her classmates for having a strange accent, or as they put it, for talking funny?
Oh, unmercifully. Teased? And you know, when the teasing starts at home, when you get outside, nothing anybody says can... One of my uncles used to call me Scrunch-a-Neil Snuff Top because my hair is not black. When I came back here and the sun got it, I was what the Bajans call goosey. So yeah, yeah, it started at home. So by the time I got to school, they started, I was like, yeah, I get that at home. So you got to come with something new now, you know. It was different. It was different. But I think because I've always known in myself that I've had this, I didn't know it was resilience then. You know, I got older and I learned big words, so I know it's resilience and empowerment. But I've always been that kid that would be like, yeah, you put me on Mars, I can find a way to survive. So I knew I wasn't going back in any hurry. So I had to, this was my life, and fighting against it wasn't going to help.
Every experience offers a lesson, and we must learn to seize these moments and understand the teachings they bring. Young Kaie quickly absorbed the lessons from her new surroundings. What were those girlhood days like for her in Bentham's, Sherman's, Sixmans and Haywoods?
You see, in London, I had my street to play on. In Bentham's, I had Bentham's and the surrounds to run about in, as long as I was home by a particular time. So there was a whole set of land. It's developed now, but there was a whole set of land at the back of the house that if you walked far enough, it would take you up to St. Lucie's Parish Church. So I remember the first rains that happened. I kind of got caught out in the rain because I was running around behind my cousins. And they all knew what was coming. You're supposed to be home before the rain starts falling. They all ran off and left me, and I got back home soaked, you know. But I would not trade those experiences for every cent in this world. Absolutely not. First time it rained, my cousins used to make little boats out of paper and float them down because, you know, the water would come down quite swiftly. I remember my grandmother had a kitchen garden and was growing tomatoes in it. And if my grandfather had said to me, let's walk from here to John O'Groats, I would happily have been behind him. So we started eating these green, very green tomatoes. And Daddy was like, oh, these are very tasty. And I'm shoveling them into my mouth, sick as a parrot the night. And my grandmother is A, quarreling because she has to look after me, and B, I've eaten her crop. Of course, she can't complain to her husband. So I got it in the neck, right? I got it in the neck. Dunks. Did the same thing with dunks. Ate them until my teeth were on edge and I was throwing up. But again, I had fun. I had fun. Good old boy days. Good old boy days. I read somewhere that your cousins are your first best friends. And I'm happy to say I have a good relationship with all of my cousins that I grew up with, you know, now. So it was good watching the boys. They would take a bicycle wheel without the rubber, you know, when you guide it with the stick. I never got that done. And I was always told it's because I was English that I couldn't get it done. So I took a lot of licks for being English, I have to say. Children are cruel. But it strengthens you. It gives you backbone. And like I said, I wouldn't change it for the world. And I was actually enjoying the experience. The only thing I did not enjoy, and to this day I don't, and I swear to God, when my eyes close and I get to heaven, I will say to God, please tell me why you invented cockroaches. Please tell me why. Because in those days we had a pit toilet. And I need to say no more about cockroaches and pit toilets. To this day, this morning, I went in the shower, I saw a dead cockroach. I called my mother, please get that out of in here. She's like, but it's dead. I said, please get it out. Yeah, don't understand cockroaches. But and growing up in a house with adults gives you a maturity about the world that stands you good in later life.
Correct. Spikestown and the northern communities of Barbados are inextricably linked. Many children fondly remember their first trip to Spikestown, recalling its sights, its sounds, and the seemingly vast expanse of the area. While Kaie doesn't recall her very first trip to Spikestown, she does have cherished memories of visiting the town.
Not my very first time, no, but I remember trips to Spikestown. My grandmother used to sell there. So we'd go and help her set up. I'd watch my grandmother sell her stuff sitting next to the other hawkers and talking and realizing that I was a part of that world, you know. And it was a sense of community. You know, basically everybody is there trying to make $1, basically selling the same stuff for the same price, but nobody was angry. Nobody was saying, get away from here because you're taking away my trade. You know, women would share their food, share jokes, share stories, and that's what I liked until my grandmother said, it's getting late, you need to get home. And getting home meant walking home. Yeah, there's no Uber, no ZRs. You walked, you know. But Spikestown was also like a big city to me, you know. I'm 6, 7 years old. It's like a big city because I'm in a little village. Although I was born in one of the biggest cities in the world, I never once compared the two until I got much older. That was, you know, this was my universe. Spikestown was a slightly bigger universe, one that sometimes I found a bit scary. But it's like, yeah, okay, I need to get back to Benham's now. It's getting late. And you know, I'm a St. Lucie girl, so you know St. Lucie has heart men. So I needed to get home before the heart man got me. And I still joke about the heart man to this day. I think my mother said one of the heart men's nicknames was Purgit or something. But it was a common thing, you know, like you didn't walk past St. Lucie's churchyard at night because the duppies would get you. And you certainly didn't walk around certain parts of St. Lucie at night because the Heart Man would get you. So all good children should be in the house by the time it was dark. Yes. And I tried to be that good child. And then later on, it was like, no, you stay home. She was going, I was left with, I have an uncle who's like 4 years older than me and an aunt who's 6 or 8 years older than me. So Anne was left in charge of us. And Grandma Urs would head off to Speightstown, and Anne would be in charge of a bundle of wayward children. But she managed to keep us in line. She managed to keep us in line. And she was an excellent, to this day, nobody does macaroni elbows with mellow cream as good as my Aunt Anne. I don't care what you serve me. That is a dish with a little bit of pigtail or salt meat in it. If I was on death row, that would be my last meal. Not that I'm planning. I'm not planning, but, you know, just in case. Yeah.
Quite interesting. Now, this showcases the diverse palates of our people. Now, during the past 4 years, we have recorded over 200 individuals, and every one of them at some point in time proudly expressed their love for their childhood community. Benthams, Shermans, and the Northwestern Corridor represent a special place that transcends time. These memories continually remind Kaie of how fortunate she is to be a Barbadian.
The house where we live now is where my great-grandparents started their family. So the area has a lot of deep meaning for me. You know, it's where my grandmother grew up. It's where my mother and her siblings grew up. My brother and I grew up there. My brother's children are growing up there now. So, and in those days, we would walk from Bentham's to Sherman's, take whatever my grandmother was sending for her parents, and then go to the beach down in Six Men's. We were able to walk from Six Men's to Speightstown on the beach because then there were houses on the beach. Now there's barely sand and lots of rocks. But I remember being able to do that trot and think nothing, absolutely nothing of it. Now I wake up early in the morning to walk to Speightstown, and by the time I get halfway, I'm like, yeah, is this such a good idea? And I used to take that road in the hot sun and not think about it. So yeah, I remember Speightstown well.
Well, any discussion on the social history of the mid-20th century Barbadian community often includes accounts of festive occasions like Christmas. Generally, the practices surrounding this popular and widely celebrated festival were similar across all rural communities in Barbados. What was it like for a little girl from London to experience Christmas preparation for the first time in her new home?
Apart from the fact that you had to pick down the house and clean it from top to bottom, yeah, I remember. I'm thinking, didn't we do this last week? But, and Mum used to send home boxes, so there was always something for everybody, and that's what we looked for, you know, little treats from over and away. And I always got my mother knows me so well. Bright red dresses, brightly colored dresses are my favorite thing. So Mummy always had a nice red dress in there for me and, you know, stuff for everybody else. And again, it was a time where, you know, if you hadn't seen family for a couple of months, you'd get together with people. And that's why even after I went back to London, I spent very few Christmases in London. I was back in the 246, just being with family, you know. I've got to give you this story. So I came from England. Mummy cooked West Indian, you know, Bajan food, but I was a fish and chips girl, and I didn't really like rice. So we get to Barbados, and my grandfather says to my grandmother, you know, she really doesn't like rice. So my grandmother was cooking a lot of English potatoes and macaroni. So a couple of weeks, I think the first week we got here, she took me down to Sherman's to meet my great-grandparents. And I suppose at 6 years old, everybody is tall. Everybody is a giant. And Papa, my great-grandfather, he just seemed like a monolith to me. So he's cooking, and he's cooking rice. And my grandmother says, "Oh, Papa, she don't eat rice." And I will never forget this. You know those blue enamel, those white plates with the blue rim? Papa put a couple of spoonfuls of white rice, dropped it in front of me. "She gonna eat that though." And you know what? I did. My grandmother cut my for making her shame in front of her father. So, you know, by the time we got back to Benham's, everybody knew that I made Ursi shame, and I could never tell my grandmother again that I didn't eat rice. I think she cooked rice for about 2 weeks just to spite me. But you see, that was my joy as well. I'd spent the first part of my life with my mother. I was living this second part with my grandparents and my great aunts and my great uncles and my cousins. And I had my great grandparents down the road. You know, it was a full circle life. It was, you know, there's a part of me that regrets that my grandparents were not alive when my brother's children were born, because they didn't get to experience what he and I got to experience, you know. But it was a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful time. You know, I remember walking home in the rain. There was no such thing. We didn't have umbrellas. You were walking home and the rain fell, you got soaked. Because by the time you got home and took off your school uniform, chances are the sun would be out. You'd be running around outside. You'd forgot about the rain. If I get rained on now, I'm highly offended. But back then, it was just all part and parcel of growing up. You know, getting your hair pressed on a Sunday morning, the sizzle, the air burning, and it always caught you right here, nowhere else, just right at the tip. And by the time you came back home, the hot comb looked like it hadn't passed through your hair at all. But these are all, you know, these are all the things that, these are the cornerstones that have made me the woman I am today. And I say to young people sometimes, you only had no boy days, you know. This social media that you have now, that's not boy days. That's avoiding life, you know. I had the best. I always say to people, my family were not wealthy in terms of having lots of money. But what we did have and what we do have is family love, family cohesion, the togetherness. And to me, that is worth more than its weight in any gold, silver, whatever.
Wow. And so we end this special episode of My Community with Kaie Cozier, who proudly proclaims her love for her family and the many benefits she gained from spending her childhood days right here in Barbados. Kaie's story is a testament to the enduring value of community and the powerful impact of family support. Thank you, Kaie, and thank you for joining us as we look forward to bringing you more inspiring stories from across our beautiful island. Until next week at the same time, I'm Sherwood McCaskey. This has been My Community.